Look like that dude from Lincoln Park.
Yeah.
I wouldn't take that as
a
Chester, whatever his name is.
Chester
Arthur?
Hutchinson.
Chester Buttocks?
Chester A. Arthur.
Chester the molester.
Oh, we've really gone off.
I feel like they're more of the private.
All right, so we're gonna do some announcements.
Now, man.
I've already started stuff, so.
Yeah, didn't you?
At Emmanuel, starting in November, we have a ministry called Room in the Inn. It's basically where during the winter months, churches open up their doors as shelters for homeless folks, and so they'll come in, get a meal, get some clean socks if they want, some clothes, coats, and stuff to take through, warm, nice rest in a safe space, and then we take them back downtown to Manor House. So we pick them up at Manor House and then take them back down. So we're looking for people to help us out in that ministry. Some of the stuff that you can do is you can be a part of the core team, which would be people to help kind of organize and coordinate November through March in that effort. It's one night a week, just so you know. We also need people to help with laundry, so you would wash like pillowcases and sheets and stuff like that. We need people who can drive, but you have to be 25 and up to do that. And then we also need people to stay the night. And so that begins November and runs through March. So if anybody's interested in that.
Is it going to be the same night? You don't know?
Yeah, I think it's going to be Saturdays, but we haven't met yet to discuss because I'm still trying to see if people want to do it, to organize it. So if you're interested in it, let me know. We'll go to Casa Hogar Benito Juarez, our children's home in Mexico, December 13th to the 20th. So if any of you are interested in that, please talk to me about it. We are going to do our Lakeshore retreat again, which is the first weekend of January. So Lakeshore is a United Methodist camp. I forget the name of the town. What's the town?
Camden.
Oh, no.
Eva.
Stoner.
Okay, so it'll be up there in Eva, Tennessee, close to Camden. It'll be $50 to go. So we need 25 people to get meals prepared for us. If not, then we'll have to do our own thing about meals, which will be fine, but it'd be nice to have Lakeshore food prepared.
So it's the
Second. So we'll leave Friday night. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
If we have a group report.
Yeah.
There's nice bubbles.
Is it us?
Man, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you.
Anyone.
Anybody have any other things that you need to announce you want to talk about in Sunday school?
Yeah, so Sunday in Sunday school there were a whopping 3 of us. So we decided that we were going to begin talking about the origins of the Lord's Prayer. There's a lot of people.
I know. It sounds like you're munching on nachos right now. Are you on here as well?
Yeah, I think it's just the feedback. Yeah, it's coming through our speakers as well.
Okay, I'm going to try to fix that. Matthew's going to talk.
But anyway, this book I got from Nathan, and it was written by a Jewish scholar and also an African American United Methodist minister. They kind of co-wrote this, and they kind of met. It was unlikely for them to meet because they both happened to be in Israel at the same time, and the Methodist minister was on this crusade that he had been studying the Hebrew language, and he was on this mission that he was going to go over there and buy the Torah. And everybody said that he was crazy because usually you can only get a Torah if you are they kind of collaborate and talk about the history behind the Lord's Prayer, the different parts of it, and what we know as the Lord's Prayer today versus the original Hebrew translation of it. So it's really cool so far. I've kind of read through a little bit of it, but yeah, come to Sunday school. It'll be fun and informative. And I'm probably going to take the lead on teaching Sunday school for the foreseeable future, unless somebody else would like to do that. But yeah, it'll be fun.
I feel like it's fixed. Amy,
Yeah.
hey.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, it's back. Anyway,
What's wrong?
we're getting some weird feedback. It sounds like everybody's eating, so I was trying to fix it.
That sounds like it.
So one of the things that I didn't mention, I meant to bring up is Danny Falk, our resident Emmanuel Recreation Director, has set up a Titans Sunday. So if you want to go see the Titans play, they're playing Cleveland, which might not be exciting, but you might like Johnny Manziel, so that might be.
Connor Shaw's there too.
And then if Johnny Manziel's playing.
Connor Shaw's there too.
He'll be there. on
South
the
Carolina
bench.
quarterback.
He'll be there. So anyway, if you
Right
want to go,
behind.
it's Sunday, October 5th. You can look at the flyer if you're interested. If you want to, if anybody wants to. This is okay.
Oh. Right now.
Wrestling.
What?
I'll
Oh, you're
just
arrested.
unplug that speaker and see if that changes.
Mine.
From the US, no, that speaker.
Oh, okay.
There's some.
Yeah.
I can or just not?
Just leave it. I think that's what's causing an issue.
Google.
Like thinking about dating, like making the same thought.
Oh, wait.
This is my favorite part.
All right, so
It doesn't sound like
last week
Oh,
we talked about the prayer that Jesus prayed in Gethsemane when he is with several of his disciples falling asleep at night. There are 4 different versions of that prayer. There's 2 in Matthew, there's 1 in Mark, and 1 in Luke. And the prayer that Jesus prays begs for this answer to some of the deepest doubts that Jesus has in that moment. He asks, or says, all things are possible, but Jesus also is quoted as saying, if it is all possible, if you are willing, he asks to remove this cup, or may this cup be taken from me, or take this cup. And Jesus says, not what I want, not as I will, or not my will, but what you want, or as you will, or yours be done. So, depending on which part of the Gospels you want to read and which one you think takes precedent in what Jesus says, all of them beg similar questions, and all of them are asking similar things. And it's these doubts and these questions like these that I think cause many people to move away from the faith altogether. And it doesn't have to be that way. I think as Christians, we have a God who's big enough to handle those things. And we can still have faith even if we have doubts. And so Jesus in this prayer, I think, models a way for us to move forward despite not having the answers to our biggest questions. That step only comes, though, when we actually face those big questions that we have, those doubts that we have. Instead of ignoring them or trying to handle them on our own, or just thinking that, oh, well, I can't talk about that because then it seems like I'm a bad Christian or something like that. Jesus embraces it with God. He shares his deepest wants and his desires of not wanting to go through what he's going through. It depends on which version you read. It depends on whether or not Jesus thinks God's even capable of doing it in the first place. And Jesus asks, all things are possible, or says all things are possible, and then the next version you read is, if it's possible. So Jesus, I think, models this way for us to face up to our life's biggest question. So last week, for those of us that were here, and hopefully you saw the text or something like that, I asked you all to kind of seek your question or figure that out, what that means for you. What would be your biggest question? To write it down, which that could be in your head or on an actual piece of paper, on your phone, or email it to me. Somebody did that. Bring them here and let's start trying to ask our biggest questions and try to, in some way, figure out what's the best way to move forward, even if we can't discover an answer for that? How do we move forward in spite of our biggest question? So we're to bring those here and face them together.
Okay.
So that is,
So it's the first little.
so it's going to be basically a really quiet and quick Bible study if you don't have any. So hopefully most of you have some sort of question that you think about. And it can be a question about anything. But I don't want it to be like, is it okay to eat cheese? For some people, yes, that's a terrible idea. So and I think you know that. I don't think you have to ask that question. You eat a piece of cheese, you find out real quick. But like questions that really are meaningful, things that you feel like if you figured this out, you would be able to move forward into a deeper relationship with God, or if you were just able to express it and get it off your chest, it would help you move forward in something. Even though Jesus didn't receive the answer until later on, Jesus still moved forward in his quest, or in what he felt like God wanted him to do. He didn't just sit there in the garden all night and all day and all the next night and all day. He didn't just stay there. He moved out of the garden and continued forward, even though he didn't quite know what the answer would be. So, or maybe he still had reservations in some way. Maybe it was something he was wrestling with for a long time, and just being able to articulate it was a way for Jesus to move forward. So, I guess the next thing would be, what questions do you have? What are your biggest questions? And then we can go from there and start figuring out how we want to start discussing those.
I got mine that I emailed in.
Okay.
Do you want to go with that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we read it verbatim or kind of come?
Where
I'm coming from on it.
Yeah, where are you coming from?
So, Bible study last week, he prompted us to find a question. And all week I was struggling with, there's a lot of stuff going on, but I really couldn't come up with a question. And then yesterday, we all know Robin Williams passed away. And Liv and I were talking about it today, and the question, it really, it hit us. And she was like, have you come up with your question? And I said, no. And then we started talking about it. And it hit me. So my question is, if someone in the physical and here on earth, as a person, has done all these great things, charitable actions, philanthropists, made people laugh over the years, if they take their life through suicide, does everything become null and void, and his entrance into heaven becomes revoked? So that was what we were talking about, is because we were watching the news and they were showing all these great things he'd done, and Libba looked at me and said, do you think, because he talked about him being a Christian, and, he always made a lot of religious jokes, but he was very well versed in Christianity, so we were unsure. And the Bible specifically says things about that. So.
I'll sit on the bar. No reason. Forgot about that.
All right.
I do that all the time.
Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, one I was thinking of was what I've been struggling with lately is like, does God really have a plan for your life? And if he does, how does that responsibility fall to make that happen? Like, is it like, I go 90, he does 10, I do 50, he does 50, kind of figuring out, first I think the main thing is, is there something that you believe that you're created to do? And then two, how do you get there? Does God provide those opportunities, and it's on you to take them? Does he provide a way regardless? How do you get there? And so that's something I've kind of struggling with.
Anybody else? One thing for me is how much of the Bible do you take literally? There's a lot that's metaphorical, there's a lot that's people remembering a long time after something happened, but how do you know, how do you work out? What of it are you supposed to believe is literally true? And how to figure that out?
Mine's kind of related to George's because it's pertaining to the Bible, but past few days I've been thinking about, especially in the New Testament, a lot of kind of the contradictions. Like, for example, like the thing that strike me, it's like talks about all the grace and forgiveness and mercy of God it's provided for us, but then, you know, in a lot of all the letters and other things, there's things, you know, it's like the man who does this, like, you know, like for example, like I can't think of anything specific, but does so and so will not enter the kingdom of God, things like that, and it's like, how do we reconcile things like that? That's kind of bugged me recently.
My question that I had been thinking of was actually almost the exact same as James's, but kind of just a more broader look on mental health and depression, and not necessarily like getting into heaven or not, but how best to be there for people, I guess. Just kind of a broader look at humanity and how to support people that we know that are struggling and all of that.
My question kind of deals with kind of an overarching theme of tragedy, and you know, everybody has, you know, a different degree of tragedy that happens in their life, but how are we to reconcile the tragedy that happens, you know, that affects us, and you know, what's the meaning behind it? Why have those things happen?
Anybody else?
Well, I needed to do that. Perfect.
I thought of two among 1,000. So the first one I thought of is, what alternatives do we actually have to global and systemic violence? Because it seems like the only answer we got is to beef up our military and throw troops and guns at it. And I feel like we kind of figured out over the last, I don't know, thousands of years that it really doesn't change much. It fixes it. It's like putting a paper towel over a fire hydrant. It sucks up a tap of the water, but most of it keeps rushing out. So I'd really like to know some ways that could be alternatives to that. And what is really a way that we could, because every time you talk about trying to respond to things nonviolently, it seems like people come back with, well, it doesn't work, they just kill you, or, you know, that's just stupid, or, you know, like, and then they think you're unpatriotic and you hate America because you think, you know, we should probably find other ways to solve our problems than kill one another. So I guess that's one of the questions You know, and I think about what's going on in Iraq and stuff. Like, how do you stop stuff like that without just reverting back to killing them before they kill you? And then the second was, you know, for me personally, and you probably have caught wind of this if you've been around me at any time, I don't have a really a huge concern about the afterlife. And so I guess a question for myself is, is heaven and hell really even a thing, and do I really care? Because it seems like the older I get, the less and less I actually care about those subjects. And I could do this without those being something that's out there for me to obtain. Like, I could live my life as a Christian and be happy to know that there is no heaven or hell. And I'd be fine with that. Not to say that there isn't boys and girls. So, calm down. If you're like, well, that's the whole reason I do this! But for me, it's not. It's just not a motivating factor. Maybe it was when I was a child, but for right now, like, if that was the only reason to believe, I could do lots of other things and believe. So I think those are the two questions that are kind of at the forefront of my mind and heart. Anybody have any others, or any that came to mind as you heard other people?
So I guess one thing that, I don't know why this popped up my head in the last few minutes, but how to be a Christian when you're in a position of responsibility, when you're being entrusted with something that belongs to somebody else, with somebody else's safety, with things that you're supposed to be very careful about. How do you be loving and generous and the kinds of things you're supposed to do as a Christian when it's not, when those actions can affect other people's health or lives or possessions or things that they've entrusted to you?
Anybody else? All right. Well, I'd say we have a few to start with. If any of you think of something, all of us do, so let me start there. To act like there is no question on our hearts and minds that we don't ever think about, or there's no doubts, is just denying ourselves the opportunity to form a deeper relationship with anybody, especially with God. If we acted like everything was always hunky-dory, everything was always perfect, we always had everything straight, and we were good to go, the human experience would be very dull. We all have those things. So I just encourage you to let this space be a safe space for you to be able to say what you want to say and to express what you want to express, and not to feel like someone's going to think less of you or judge you. That's, if we can't do that here, if we can't be honest with one another here, why do we even sit in a room together? With that being said, did any of these, I know as individuals we came with their own questions, but as a group, is there one that we heard people discuss or someone bring up that you kind of resonate with, and maybe we should go with that as a question to move forward and discuss? So do you want me to read them all? Okay. What alternatives do we have to global systemic violence? Heaven and hell, is that even a thing? Do I care? Going off recent events, if someone does great things in their life and then commits suicide, does everything become null and void, and that entrance into heaven is revoked? Does God have a plan for your life? And He does. How does the responsibility fall? Is it 50-50, or is God 90 and me 10, or the other way around? How do you get into following that plan? How much of the Bible should you take literally? How do we be a Christian in the face of responsibilities, or stay Christian in things that seem to be contradictory to the faith? Did I phrase it right?
Yeah.
How do we reconcile things that seem like contradictions in the Bible? How do we be there for people who are struggling? I guess would be the best way. So, and then how are we to reconcile tragedies with meaning? Or what's the meaning behind that? After reading those, does that any of those sound like? We will do a silent vote, obviously. So I will count.
No, I think I don't know. I thought James's question kind of resonates with me, just because like I have that thought occasionally, like what, like can one bad act or one act like that? I mean, it's kind of his question, but just like that idea that one thing you do can wipe out everything you've accomplished, and even the flip side of that, like kind of I think going off of that. Is the whole idea of is it ever too late for somebody to be quote unquote saved? Somebody who's spent their entire life doing bad things, and in one moment they do something good. Can that change things for them? Well, whatever that means as far as afterlife or not, but just that whole, like whether it's exactly how James put it, or even the converse, I think is an interesting struggle that I know that I have as well. In addition to all the other questions, but that struck me.
And I would have to say, Travis's question did the same thing about God's plan. You're always questioning it. I mean, one of my favorite phrases from one of my favorite movies is "The Lord works in mysterious ways." And I hold that to be true. And we don't know it, but sometimes when crap happens, you're like, why am I going through this? So is it part of God's plan? Could I have done something, was this going to happen anyway? Or, could I have done something different and a better person somewhere along the way?
Anybody else have thoughts of which ones we should discuss?
Not specific.
Also, like your question about heaven and hell. I mean, like, is it something, and should we be worried about it, kind of thing? Like, I think it kind of piggybacks off James's question as well. It's like why do you live the way you do? Like, what do you deeply believe is going to happen because of your belief? Like, will it change the way you live or the way you live after you die? Like I think that question is very interesting to me too, the one you asked about that.
Probably both of those questions, because I think they tie together. Travis was saying.
Okay. Well, I guess the best way to try to discuss is to talk about our initial impressions of the subject, to analyze it by where we are as far as thinking about something currently. So it's a multi-layered question, so I'd rather not do multi-layers. Like, I'd rather focus specifically on something and go from that. I think that that'll help us stay on topic.
Well, why don't we start with
And then
is there
figure out
heaven or
the
hell?
questions. Okay.
And see, I feel like that the answer to, or someone's answer to that might be related to the other questions, I guess. How we should look at it.
Or at least,
It's a little
even
more
if,
concrete.
yeah, and maybe even if it's not a, I don't know. I feel like at that point we're like putting people on the spotlight. Let's see what they think about that. Maybe it could be like, what are your impressions of it in some way? Like, if you have a belief of heaven and hell, what are those beliefs about that? What is your impression or thought? Is that like upset? Okay. All right. George? Oh, this is where everybody's going to talk, by the way. So even if your initial thoughts are,
You say
we
that.
can do that.
Follow the
So one thing that this immediately brings to mind for me is my father's explanation of essentially this, how he
Like
solved
God
this
or your
question. My dad, literal father.
birth father.
So I forget how old I was. I was in high school, I think, when my dad told me that he didn't believe in heaven as a place you go to after you die. And he said that his belief in heaven is more or less, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but what you believe, what you leave behind in the world is to him, heaven was reaching a place where the people whose lives you've touched see you as a good force in their existence, I guess. And so to reach heaven is to be remembered after you're gone as a force for good, as someone who made a positive impact, however it was. And I don't know that I'm at a point where I can say this is exactly what I believe in, or something else is what I believe in, but I think that's a really interesting way to view it. That, and particularly, and this also comes to mind when people talk about certain translations of the Bible where Jesus is talking about the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven, and it's usually interpreted to mean an afterlife, something you go after you die, but it could also be thinking about how does God's kingdom come about on earth. And I think that's an interesting way to view it, that potentially the idea of heaven is about making life on earth more perfect. Hell, on the other hand, I have a hard time believing in hell as a place of eternal punishment. But if hell is the idea of you've wasted your opportunities in life to do what you could, to make a difference, to be a Christian, or whatever that really means. And once you die, that's permanent, that's fixed, nothing more can be done about it. I could see that as an opposite of heaven, but as a fire and brimstone place with devils with pitchforks making you do whatever, I struggle a lot with
We go in around.
I would wait for people to speak up, but I feel like that
Okay.
it's a lost cause. So
Well, I'm excited about the idea of a place that's warm. But that doesn't inspire me to act a certain way instead of dressing in the morning. I'm not going to that when George's not looking. I see how long it takes before you notice that the air conditioning's off. It doesn't take me long. Hear it. That's the problem.
but yeah.
I have a hard time envisioning the number of people or souls that would belong to heaven, or what it would mean to, like, would you like hang out with people you know, or is it kind of like here, just but now somewhere else? Like, sometimes you know people and then you move where and then you get to know others, and maybe I like to think of it as more of a place like that, like you. It's not like everyone's in the same spot and you just know everyone all the time and everyone's perfect. It's more like, I guess it's kind of like reincarnation, I suppose, but not here. And I think heaven and hell I struggle with in terms of society type bounds that are placed. And, how do you say that's right or that's wrong? Or I feel like a lot of it's like I think what you know from growing up in a certain society versus what you know that's good as just a physical human being. Like, I probably would have not punched someone, but I might have like burped, and then maybe that's like frowned upon in society. And you know, it's just like, I guess it's not really the same thing, Christian or not, but quite not frowned upon in Christian. It's a bad example, but just kind of thinking about how those relate. I don't know what the question was I was supposed to answer, but I'm going to stop there.
Be right, heaven. You like it?
Yeah.
Okay. Hell, don't like it.
Don't like it. Don't like it at all.
Amy?
Yeah.
Baby.
I'm talking. Can you hear me? Hello?
I can't hear you.
Can't hear me. Okay.
Speaker
Well,
You
I
don't plug the Bose speaker from the computer. So
It's our fault. That's my bad. I got you now.
okay. Well, I used to really wonder about the whole heaven and hell question because I've had a few family members die, and it got to the point where, you know, people were always saying that, like, they were watching over me, and I found that a little weird and creepy. Because I figure once you get to heaven, you would have better things to do.
No, it's just like here. Everybody's a busybody.
Well, I got really, as I've gotten older, I'll agree, like, the whole question of an afterlife has not really bothered me. I haven't really, being a good person, being a good Christian, I don't think you need that carrot in the end to be rewarded. So it's not something that I really even wonder too much about. When I was younger, I hoped for an afterlife because I want to see my dad again and I want to see my brother again. But I don't know if that's something that, you know, I don't know. Like, with the afterlife, I'd rather there not even have to worry about that question, because then you're going to have to contemplate, like, if your family is there. And, you know, I just got comfortable being okay with just really focusing on now and being good and helpful and loving, like really living your life and loving people. And that would be enough reward for me not to really concern myself about having an afterlife and going to a heaven as sort of like a reward. If that makes any sense. And so I guess like I've gotten more to the point where it doesn't really matter about an afterlife. And so if there is one, that's cool. If there isn't one, it's cool too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anna, Wes?
I'm not really sure how pertinent it is, but I guess for Jewish people around Jesus' time, there is this idea of resurrection, right? And so there were a lot of Jewish people who felt like there would be a new life, like a new era after this era that they were living in, where people who lived justly and who lived well and were righteous people would be rewarded, because in their lives they often didn't get those rewards. And people who were not just would be punished. And so when Jesus dies and is resurrected, that was the beginning of a new age. And Jesus would say things like, the kingdom of heaven is near. And so like there's this idea that a new age is coming, that the kingdom of God is being rebuilt, and there will be a new heaven and a new earth. And all things will be whole, and nations won't fight anymore. Okay. So like when I think of Israel, I kind of think of, what if there's this new world that we're moving?
Something has happened. You have a crazy
Can you hear me?
It's like an echo.
It's going.
Well, that's really what it was. Not necessarily that you die and you go to either a good place or a bad place, but that somehow, through God's goodness, the world will be made new. And people who didn't receive good things in this life, even justly,
Yeah.
it's
So sorry. It's getting all funky. Can you mute your microphone?
Who, me?
Amy, your microphone. Okay, let's see if that works.
Is that better?
Yeah.
So did you hear anything I said?
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Most of it. It was just echoing.
Oh.
And yeah.
Well, that's what I had to say.
You just basically you emphasized every point you were making twice.
Oh, that's nice.
Wes, do you have any thoughts?
To me, hell is a place where Google Hangouts has double voices.
Yeah.
No, but my thoughts on hell are like, you grow up and you watch these movies, and there's like this guy dressed as Satan, and there's fire, and it's just supposedly really hot, and you don't want to be there. But in my opinion, my thoughts on hell is like things that here on earth that cause you pain or suffering. And I think that'll be what hell is, or what I imagine hell to be. And then heaven is this place that I would wish to be, like a place where I think that I would be the most comfort and be most happy at. But again, I don't know if that's, I'm kind of with you, Nathan, like if that really is a place, or is it just something that we just think that is real to keep us going forward in life. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Well, I like everything that's been said so far. and I don't even want to presume what I think hell is or what heaven is or is not. But what I hope it isn't is, what our culturally dominant view of heaven and hell is, with, heaven being the, like, everybody gets a mansion in the sky, and, all the streets are made of gold, and, to me, it's almost like it's almost being self-serving, because you're told while you're here on Earth, while you're alive here on Earth, that you're not supposed to focus on material things, but when you get to heaven, that's your reward, is material things. So to me, I was brought up with that, and I've always struggled with what that means, because it's always been conflicting to me, and I honestly don't know what to think about hell. I kind of tend to agree that I don't even think it may even be a place, honestly. And yeah, I'm rambling, so I'll stop.
Mine was actually very similar to George's. I was also told in high school that heaven is what you leave here, and how you feel when you're about to die. And hell was all the sins that you've done. I really never got the concept. Like, we would draw pictures of what you think heaven would be like, and I always struggled with that. It was never a clear picture. It was like random stuff that made me happy. Kids would draw like clouds, and I never really did that. So when you started talking, I was like, oh my god. But it was basically like that. My Sunday formation teacher said it's what you do here on earth is what heaven is. And so I've carried that with me.
I think for me, I have a lot of random thoughts that may or may not go together. So, I just don't really know in totality what I believe about either place, or if there is a place. But I do think, one, I think we fear death for a reason. I don't know what that reason is, but I know for me, whenever I'm not concerned necessarily with the afterlife until I think about me dying. And I think that there's a reason for that. Whether that's because there's a place, or whether that's because culture has just taught you that, something's about to happen. It's either going to be good or bad when you die. But I think that being an innate fear that most people face, even though they might think about it in their everyday life and how they live the entirety of their life, but whenever they face their death, I think there is fear for a reason. But at the same time, I think too about heaven, that people, what we hope for in heaven may not be heaven. No one knows what heaven is. Mm-hmm. And what the things that I feel like people strive so far for, including me at times, is thinking, I want to be rewarded to be with those people that I long for, that I miss in my life. When, in fact, if that's not heaven, then then that strife is meaningless, because it doesn't, what you're striving for may not even exist, because it's a figment. It's been created that, where are we necessarily promised that all those people that have died before us are going to be with us again, and that we're going to live with them and be happy with them and carry on life as we do now, and how we remember them and how we love them and how we spend time with them. I don't feel like any of that's really guaranteed to us, and I don't know like if you take that out of the equation and take that, like what do people think heaven is? What are they striving for? And I like what they were saying about, George and Kate, about it being something that you leave behind, maybe. I'm not really sure. I remember writing, you talking about the streets of gold. There is, whether or not that's, I personally don't believe that that's depicting heaven, but it is a passage in the Bible where it talks about streets of gold. It's just like a vision. And I remember writing a song, one that Libba asked me to write for her mom, and one of the things I wrote in one of the lyrics was, and I thought about this specifically, it's just coming back now, is I'd trade the streets of gold for an ever-flowing stream of peace. And so, like, I think to myself, in our lives right now, what we're striving for, like, would we say that whatever our picture of heaven is, would we trade that for an end to the strife that we face right now? Like, is that something that we would exchange? And I feel like when you're in those times of struggle here on earth, that you would, you would long for that peace. And is that heaven? Is that hell? I don't know. But those are just some thoughts.
Right. Well, for me, I don't know. I still honestly haven't really figured out exactly, my perception of heaven and hell. I've heard there's a lot of things that I've I've heard the thing like George and Kelly were saying about making, your place on earth, bringing heaven to earth, and that's I remember Steve Stone, his favorite book in the world is Velvet Elvis by Rob Bell. He talks about that constantly. That's a big thing he talks about in that book. And so that's really interesting. And I don't know, I kind of like to think of it as just a big place where you get to go and see everyone, meet family members you never met, things like that. But I kind of tend to think that that's not what it's going to be like for whatever reason. And I don't know. I kind of just see it as in some ways as being just you being with God, and kind of just a place where you rest after, because there's so much going on in your life, crap you have to deal with, and then finally, after it's all over, you kind of get that, I don't know, just rest. and it's more it's kind of more just peace than anything else. And then hell is just, there's God's not there at all, which is kind of unfathomable to us in a lot of ways. So I don't know. Yeah, I just haven't really totally figured out how I feel about it.
I really thought about this a lot about what heaven. We've always seen the pop culture depictions of heaven and hell. Heaven's really bright, everybody's burning white, and then hell's flames shooting up everywhere. But it's kind of we don't know what it is, if it's there or not. But I just I hope that the way I see it is it is a place, it's a state, it's a state that there's an afterlife, and it's hard to describe. I want to describe it because I have it in my mind, but it's one of those things that you can't. Part of me wants it to be like an airport, and there's a big sign every day, and it tells you who's arriving. You know what I mean? It tells you who's arriving, and you're there to wait on it. Or there'll be people, as soon as you cross through the gates, there's everybody you wanted and more waiting for you. But I just, as funny, as crazy as it sounds, it's probably not. Once you close your eyes, we're good. It's just science tells us that it's just darkness. So I don't know. Hell, ooh. I've been in certain situations that have felt like hell, but that's a good unknown question. Thank you, Nathan, for making us ponder that.
Y'all come up with good questions too. That's just what we're talking about.
And if I could jump back in, I don't know, your thought about whether there's an afterlife at all, and like, I don't know, I just like growing up around like church stuff, it's like that's not even like a thing. Like there is an afterlife. You don't even think like about otherwise. So that's kind of crazy thinking about that. And I've read a few things like I had to read Plato in college about how he's like, yeah, I don't know that there's an afterlife, and if there's not, the worst thing that could happen is I could go to sleep forever, and it'd be the best sleep I've ever had. It's like, I don't know, it's kind of like stuff like that like blows my mind, like even thinking about that. Anyway.
I mean, I honestly feel there's an afterlife, and not from like a paranormal standpoint or a parapsychology standpoint. I feel that there's once people leave this earth, there are ways. I told this to Olivia hundreds of times. My grandfather collected bicentennial quarters, and they were only made in 1976, so there's not many of them. And once he passed away, I find them all the time. When I'm getting in down situations, I'll go get something to eat or somewhere and get change. There's a bicentennial quarter in my change. And it's my way, people may think I'm crazy, but it's my way of knowing that he's still there, helping me, because he was one I would always go talk to about stuff. So, I don't know, it's just my intellect telling me, not my intellect, but it's just my gut feeling that there's a way of communicating. Very well.
I don't want to. If you wanted to say something, I don't want to leave you out since you joined us like that.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. Where you started? I mean, like, there's a specific question.
It's just your impressions of heaven and hell. Like, you have an impression of it or a thought.
I think, was it Descartes that said, I think
Mm-hmm.
that, and that's kind of how, like, if you don't, that sucks. I don't know what you're going to do. But I mean, if you're a musician, and God can be happy with you forever, and you can please Him for you play for Him, and let that be your heaven. And then, yeah, I mean, like you said, you can't really fathom what hell is if you like know the presence of God and like that's something that is not going to leave you unless you walk away from it. So, I think it's also like a here and now thing because there are parts of my life that are heavenly to me. There are parts of my life that are hell to me. And in those parts, and I've actually been through enough at 25 to know what it's like to jump the chasm between the heaven and earth. Like going from a terrible relationship to being happy not being in a relationship and having legitimate options for a good relationship, like that's kind of heavenly and considering the hell that I've been through. And there are also situations in my life that I'm not going to shine light on them, and so therefore they're in the darkness of my hell, and I don't see God there. And all I can do is pray and ask God to reveal Himself to me in those places so that they can become heavenly places in my life. So that's how I feel. I think it's not a here nor there. Like I have little beliefs upstairs, and I like that book. A lot of people don't. This idea of dragging the future into the present, it's a beautiful thing. And I think that if we all individually
pray and ask for God's love and grace and forgiveness and allow Him to shine light in the hell, because that's what Jesus did. I mean, His whole life is just like an allegory for the reality of life, which is that He came and shined light down in a dark place, and there was no place for the darkness to hide. And if you let God do that in your life, it's clean. But you don't believe in heaven. I really don't. I don't know. It's sad and stuff.
This actually randomly came up at work today, actually, between me and Todd. But I don't think I live my life motivated by heaven or hell. I think, and so, but their existence is still kind of like, when I was a little kid, like everybody else, was kind of firm. Yeah, there's a heaven, yeah, there's a hell, don't want to go there. I want to go to heaven and see my grandparents and all that. It's a nice big family reunion. That idea. But I haven't, like, it's not something that I think about a lot. And so I want to think that there's an afterlife or that there's a heaven, but what it consists of, I got good, but other, like, not bad. Like, I don't really have, like, concrete ideas about if it's a place or a state of being, whatever, like a physical, like, non-corporeal kind of stuff. I don't know.
I think for me, hell, I think we experience hell on earth. I think we experience it in our lives. I think hell, I don't think of it as a fiery brimstone place. I think of it as separation from God. We had, when I was at Lambeth, I think I was in Old Testament at the time, one of my professors, Professor Davenport, who was fabulous, he was an Old Testament scholar, and the first time I had heard someone, I guess, say that he believed in hell, but he did not believe in a God who would condemn anyone to an eternity of hell. And that is probably one of the few things I remember from the class, or one of that moment, because it started my mind thinking on that, and it's pretty powerful. As far as heaven goes, I think I do believe in an afterlife, and I don't know for sure. I believe that we are transformed into and transformed to have the relationship with God that we were created to have in the beginning. For me, I think that's what I would like to think that's, yes, we get to see, we are reunited with people in heaven. And I think that's very possibly could be part of it. But what does that mean for my mom, whose first husband that she loved dearly died when my brother was 3, and she remarried, and what does that mean for her after that? So it's kind of interesting to think. Yeah.
Y'all are smart. Cool. Welcome to the Bible study. No. Tell us. No, actually, it's really funny. I was thinking about this weekend. How funny. Because there's a movie that came out about this little boy. His appendix ruptures. And they take him to... Yes. And so I didn't watch it, and I really wanted to, but my brother was being stupid, so we didn't, and then we watched Neat Boo Boo instead. I'm okay with that. It's fine. It's fine. But anyway, so it's really funny because, this little kid is sitting there telling all these adults, this is what heaven is, and all these adults are like, no, just laugh, no. And this kid's like, no, I'm right. So it was just interesting because I was sitting there going, that same kind of thing that a lot of people have said. When you're little, it's that kind of very black and white. Like, yeah, there's heaven. Okay, cool, I'm going there. No, I'm not going down there. You know, but, you know, then you kind of start, and now that I've kind of been thinking about it, you know, when I was little, it's like, oh, the big pearly gates, and everybody's in white and playing lyres and lounge. You're like, oh, and I'm just sitting here going, that sounds ridiculous. Like, one, I hate white. Like, I would look like a ghost all the time. So, like, maybe if we changed the robes to pink, you know, I'm kind of sitting there going, gosh, this just sounds ridiculous. Now that you like sit there and cool, okay, because I'm not musically inclined whatsoever. I can't even clap in time with music. So me sitting there strumming a harp and singing, no, it's not gonna be me. I'll be clapping on the side. But it's just kind of funny because I really hadn't thought about it until my mom was talking about that movie, and I'm sitting here going, gosh, that's something I haven't really thought about in a long time, because I just feel like the older you get, the more you put on your plate, and you're sitting there so focused on how am I going to get out of this situation, how am I, you know, getting through this trial period that, you know, I want to think God's like getting me out of it, and kind of goes back to what your original question was, is, you know, what's the plan? And I'm like sitting there going, Jeremiah 29:11, it's great that you have a plan for me, but, you know, I'm kind of a type A personality, and I really want to know. It'd be nice if you let me in on that, because I'm sick of this. And so it's just kind of been this like crazy thing going on with my family lately, and my uncle passed away earlier this last month, and so it's just kind of been this whole like, and it was, you know, I don't want to bore y'all, but like he overdosed on drugs, and it was kind of this whole thing of like, wait, what? Like, where did, you know, it's that whole thing of the Robin Williams and everything kind of thing everybody's talking about, so my brain's like about to explode from all this topic. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there are some really neat perspectives that y'all gave that I had never even thought of. Like, you know, heaven is what you make on earth. I think that's a really cool idea that I'd never really thought about before, because yeah, I mean, you are your legacy. You don't take anything with you, so what are you going to leave behind? And it's kind of that Girl Scout motto, leave it better than you found it. And so, I mean, I think that's a very simple idea, but I love the idea of being able to sleep, because I can't sleep because my brain just goes on and on. So thank God for Ambien, whoever invented that. I love you. But, you know, then like the whole big bed, and it's peaceful, and, you know, trading the golden streets, and maybe I'll keep part of the golden streets for some of the peace, but because I like shiny things. But, you know, I think that's a neat idea too. And then the airport, oh gosh, that would be awesome. I love airports, though. So.
There's a Sbarro in heaven.
I mean, how interesting are airports, though? Everybody loves to go people watch at the airport. Imagine the weirdos and the cool people you would meet in heaven. Like,
literally the portal.
Right?
Crazy. The ultimate portal.
Crazy. Instead of pearly gates as security
It's
gates.
just domestic. That's the only people from America go.
There's no customs.
Guys, funny joke. Yeah, so I don't know. It's I don't know. I feel like I've gotten so caught up like I said, just I feel like when you get older, it's just your brain starts focusing less on the long term and realizing, you know, I only have so much time here with these people, because you don't know. And it is kind of scary, and you don't want to like put all your eggs in one basket and be like, yep, that's it, I'm done. And then you look at scary pictures from, you know, the Sistine Chapel and all that stuff, and demons coming at you, and you're like, ooh, I really don't want to go there. But I don't know. Crazy. My head hurts now. Move on.
Quickly, if I do think there is a heaven, then I think that heaven is not a place we go, but heaven will be a place that's created on earth. And I think that I've read some stuff, and just reading through Revelation at the end of where the ultimate destination or the ultimate idea in that book is not that we all get raptured and float up to the sky, but that God comes back down to earth and restores earth to whole, and everything is whole again. So I guess for me, if that's something to strive towards by, helping God in some way bring about that restoration of the earth and the universe. I feel like that's heaven. N.T. Wright wrote a book called Surprised by Hope about resurrection. And in it, he talks about life after death. And so his thought is that when we die, we go to rest with God. And then when resurrection happens, that is when life after death begins on earth. So if that is any idea, that'd be the idea that I would think of. And then hell, if there is such a thing, I think it is the absence of God, and we can choose whether or not we want God's presence or not, ultimately. And it's not a. Have anybody ever seen Little Nicky? It's not Little Nicky. It's not pineapples. That's fine. It is. I think it's just being annihilated. There's a theological term called annihilationism, which basically says that in your ultimate end, hell would be you being annihilated. And the way that happens is the absence of God. God removes God's self from your presence, and you no longer exist. So to me, I think that's hell, to no longer exist and no longer have God in my life presence. And then as far as like seeing people and stuff like that, my dad died when I was 16. My grandfathers, my grandmothers, people like that. I'd love to see those people again. As far as like not being motivated by it, I think that a little bit comes from the fact that I think I am living in heaven in some way because it's going to be here. So by living as Jesus would want me to live, in some way I'm contributing to that. So I'm not so worried about that. I do think about that fear factor, though. I think being someone who is, I don't tend to think about it this way, but I am privileged. And I think being privileged sometimes gives me the option to not think about certain things. It gives me the option not to be scared. It gives me the option to think different thoughts. As if I lived in the jungle somewhere and, LRE guy was trying to find me and, I'm in the Ukraine right now. Maybe I'm not so absent-minded of a better place and somewhere I get to go that's not like this. I think privilege has a little bit to do with mine. I'm not like naive to that, but ultimately I think heaven will be earth reconciled and hell is being annihilated. If I'm not 100% sure I even care, but it's the intellectual part of me. So,
if I could just say one other thing that I was thinking about too, just to kind of throw this into the mix. As we were sitting here, like it makes me think like maybe not necessarily about whether there's an afterlife or not, but about the idea of resurrection. Like like when you think of Jesus coming to this earth, he dies for us, and would it mean anything if he didn't raise, if he didn't live again? Like the kind of that thought just kind of kept popping up into my mind. I don't really know how that ties into how I haven't really formulated it, like what I believe about how that plays into whether there's an afterlife really important. But I think there is something. I think that's why, whoever was talking, I think it was Morgan or somebody was talking about whenever you're a kid, and especially in church, that's not even like a thing that there's no afterlife, because it's like, it's almost like central, maybe not the afterlife idea, but just the idea of resurrection is so central to Jesus and what he did, that it's almost like that part of resurrection, whatever that means, whatever that looks like, whether that's this, it being here on earth and it renewing the garden growing out of the streets of concrete and forming into a new heaven here on earth, that kind of idea. But just thinking about the whole, like, Jesus died for us and then rose again, I think that has to play into how we think about things in some way, whether or not it's the afterlife or just resurrection in general. So that was just something I was thinking about to throw in the mix.
I think, for Christians, there's definitely this thing called the Apostles' Creed that lots of us like recite and study and believe in. And, I think it would be good to analyze that sometimes and not just blatantly say it, because it talks about stuff that I think sometimes we just pretend like we believe in. Do we really? I mean, I don't know. It's the same thing of looking at a hymnal and singing words out of a book. Do they even mean anything to me, or am I just singing it because that's what we're singing right now? So, I think there's a lot to digest and think about when you talk about it. I think, like I said, for me, it's a thing. Like, I like talking about it. I think it's cool to hear what other people think. I think it strengthens what I think, and it also strengthens what I don't. But also, ultimately, other things matter to me more. So I'm not worried. I don't believe the right thing sometimes because God's got grace. So what I want us to do is for next time, we're not going to leave this question and go to another one because we haven't even approached. I think one of the central reasons of our faith is this thing called the Bible. And so I feel like we should explore what that looks like this week in the light of what we just said and what each other thinks or our impressions of heaven and hell, to go to the Bible, since it's supposed to be, perfect for faith and practice of our faith. At least that's what my tradition says. My year says it's inerrant, literally true, and we'll get to that later. And maybe go to it and see what we think it says about heaven and hell in the light of what we said, and read it. Maybe write down some passages that stick out to us, things that might have surprised us, or things that maybe reinforce things that you originally thought, or things that were contradictory to what you think, and we'll bring those back and start to look at what maybe Scripture says about heaven and hell, and see if that helps us clarify a little bit where we're at currently. Cool. All right. Thank you for being honest and sharing and bringing your questions. And if you have more questions, please send them to me. I'm going to keep a tally so we can keep exploring other questions once we feel like we've gotten to a place where we can't talk about this anymore. Anything we should be praying about this week?
I'm dealing with some dietary issues. I'm thinking that I have a wheat allergy or perhaps something more. But I've been miserable for like the last week and a half, so I need to get it figured out because I'm having a hard time eating stuff and not feeling sick afterwards. So.
Pray for my family as we still wait for my parents' visas to come in to go. Hopefully get my new brother from.
Keep praying for the Hairston family. For the memorial service.
Everybody knows that's Saturday. Those of you that.
Safe travels. Taylor and I are both going out of town this weekend. So. Not together.
Not together. No. Are we going different directions?
Yes.
Yeah, we're going. Yeah.
Prayers.
Sorry.
I was gonna say prayers for everybody struggling with issues that for whatever reason they keep silent. And for this official. So.
How you pumping about Syria?
I haven't heard an update. How's she doing?
She's doing well, actually. She's been telling a lot to me about it.
Good.
So that's good.
Has she started back to school yet?
Yeah, she has.
On a more like national note, I want to pray for two families. The family of Mike Brown, who was really murdered at his house, and the family of Harvey Williams. And on that note, I just want to say, especially in conjunction with the prayer request about silent struggling, like to make so many laugh, like to make the world laugh, and to be on the inside dying of depression, like that's a hell, you know, that I can't imagine. To put smile on so many people's faces and be struggling to the point of death. So to lift up his family, his children.
Somebody want to pray for us?
Okay. Dear God, thank you for a safe space to talk about our struggles. We pray that you are with us even then, and even in our disbelief, and even in our uncertainty about what we believe. Help us believe that you're bigger than all that, and that your love surrounds us all, and your grace surrounds us all, regardless of what we think to be the most truth. And just help us in this upcoming week and in the weeks ahead as we talk about things we don't normally get to talk about, but that in those things we can strengthen our relationship with you and hopefully bring about a heaven in whatever way that means in your eyes. And we lift up all these prayer requests for the travel, for death, and for the struggles that accompany that, and all the other requests that have been lifted up, God. We know you've heard them, and we know you've heard even the ones that we haven't said out loud. And we just pray that you be with all of them, and that you be with all of us through this next week. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Travis. Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Charlotte makes
That's exactly what